kids feel like I'll watch it on later, so now we're ready.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Appreciate your time here tonight. My name is Laura Karstens. I'm a senior planner with ECIA, East Central Intergovernmental Association. I've had the pleasure of working with that and the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Zoning Board of Adjustment a bit on this project. So our idea here today was that we would share for the public just a summary of the major changes, but we're certainly happy to answer specific questions. We've already had a few come in, so we have to do that. So overall, I'm just going to go through the presentation, and then we can take questions at the end. We'll also be in an open house format, so the information that's on the screen is also on the posters. And we have forms where you can write down that you would like to have more information about something and give us information on how to reach you on that topic. Okay.
Always see that.
So the first part of, well, what I wanted to talk about was exactly what is the zoning ordinance. It's part of the city code. You already have a zoning ordinance, so it's part of your local law. And it is what divides the community up into districts or zones. Each of those zones has regulations for the types of land uses that would be allowed, the types of buildings that can be built, how closely together buildings or structures can be, and where they would be placed on the property. Sometimes we call that bulk regulation. Also the size of those buildings. So there's two main parts: the text, which is the ordinance itself, and then the zoning map, which is the large map that we have on display here, and that is at the end of the ordinance. The reason we have a zoning ordinance is to promote health, safety, general welfare of the community. It's also the primary means for a city to implement its comprehensive plan. And we try to make sure we tie the zoning regulations to those long-range goals for development. This ordinance that we're recommending has 9 major sections. There's one on general provisions, there's one on regulations for the districts, additional regulations that apply, and then separate sign regulations, separate parking regulations, and then a section on how is this ordinance administered, how is the regulations enforced, and what are the roles of the zoning board of adjustment and the planning commission and the city council in some cases. And then it has a definition section. So the general provisions really just kind of set the stage and remind us all of what is that purpose, what's its purpose and its authority and its jurisdiction. Really have to do with the city of Asbury, but it's also consistent with your adopted plans, and it needs to follow certain requirements like a Iowa open meetings law. We also have a description in that first part about what are the roles of the city council, the zoning administrator, the board of adjustment, and the planning commission. And then section 2 gets right into those districts we talked about. So this is the time to have official zoning map. It provides regulations for the various districts. There's also some general rules in here about what happens if property is annexed to the city. How are we supposed to make sure this conforms to the other regulations? And then it goes through a description of the zoning districts. The districts that we have planned we'll talk about a little bit. They're very similar to what you have now. Some that weren't being used have been eliminated. One of the things we did was, in terms of land use, was instead of having lots of specific uses. We try to group things into general use categories. So some of those are listed, those are all listed here. Agriculture, general office, general retail, general services. The idea was to give us a category rather than specific use, so you could be flexible as uses change over time. These are the districts that are being recommended. And here it lists them on, along with the intention we have planned for them. So agriculture is still there as a conservation method for farmland. It's like a holding zone before development might occur prematurely. The A2 is a rural residential that has some symmetry, allows agriculture and very low density uses. The R1 single family is the most restrictive. That's for low density, detached single family residential homes. The R2 residential is residential areas with single and duplex. R3 is a mix of residential styles, including multifamily. Or, excuse me, and then there's multifamily, which provides that mix. And there was another residential district that was eliminated because it wasn't used. And there was also 2 office districts that were eliminated because they weren't being used on the map. So the office district we have here is a combination office commercial, but it also allows for residential uses above the first floor. The C1 retail is for daily shopping needs and service retail type services. The general commercial then would be an even broader range of services. And then the planned unit development district has been updated to be more flexible, innovative, and for these specific uses that you see here: large commercial, office, shopping, retail developments, large multifamily dwellings, mobile park and mixed-use developments. Industrial uses are not found in the recommended ordinance. It's been eliminated. But if the council chose, I suppose you can amend it or have use it as a plan development. But at this time, there's no industrial development. The types of updates we did for the districts themselves, I mentioned earlier, was that category, larger categories of land uses, but we also looked at setbacks and other development aspects. And so each of the districts is set up similarly. We have a statement of intent. What are the principal uses, the conditional uses, and accessory uses? Principal uses would be a house, for example, then a accessory use would be a garage, and a conditional use might be in-home daycare. There's also a table of bulk regulations with each district, so it describes setbacks from all the property lines, how high buildings can be. And we also have information about sign, off-street parking regulations, which are in separate chapters. Another change is we updated regulations dealing with stormwater runoff. So we're talking about building coverage, which is what portion of the lot is covered by buildings. Impervious surfaces, which is any hard surface, typically man-made, that doesn't let water go through. Concrete would be an example. And then lot coverage is how much of a property is covered by those 2 things. So, about the picture there at the bottom, there's the house, there's the driveway. And that becomes our lot coverage. We also have what we call supplemental zoning regulations. So these are things that apply all across the town. like this visibility triangle, every place where there's a corner, we're trying to make sure that there's visibility for people to see around that corner. There's some of them are specialized. The attached accessory dwelling unit is something that's allowed in residential, would be allowed in residential. But it's a special use that has a set of standards, so it's in this supplemental section. Another example in this section is we looked at the regulations in your zoning ordinance now for animals. Also in your regulations for animal care and protection, and separate for your ordinance, and then your urban chicken policy. And so what we did is work through all of those. And it took us 3 or 4 meetings, a lot of discussion on how to make sure animals are taken care of, people are allowed to have them in a way that doesn't interfere with the use and enjoyment of your products. We also looked at some other things. We looked at how things are addressed in terms of outdoor storage, as well as outdoor display and sales for businesses, and then storage containers. So this section was updated to reflect what's in that chart. We also did a number of updates to make sure this ordinance matches changes in Iowa code. So things like home-based businesses, family homes, manufactured, mobile, and modular homes are all updated to meet the code. We have a section for fences that was updated and kind of summarized in the center. So we have some setbacks and regulations to make sure that fences don't stray into easement areas, they don't go across property lines accidentally, but also that we're conscious of where is that visibility triangle. We also added things like the wireless communication towers, antennas, and small wireless stations. You have regulations in your current ordinance for cell towers, but there's an incredible amount of state law. So this is really designed to make sure your ordinance is in compliance with that. And down at the bottom, there's this little thing called grandfather. We have a name for it. It's called nonconformities. This lets everything in your community that doesn't quite match what's proposed here or whatever gets adopted to exist. And it sets out how things can be handled if things have to be repaired or replaced after they're damaged by, say, a storm or a fire. That section is there to talk about lots of the buildings, parking, signs, that type of thing. All is addressed in that combined section. We have two new updates. One is for solar energy. The commission spent a lot of time looking at what kinds of ways they could help bring renewable energy into the community, and these two sections really try to deal with that. So they were crafted particularly with residential areas in mind, but also providing opportunities in non-residential areas for things like solar arrays on a building or standing alone, freestanding, as well as wind energy systems. And so those are summarized here in these charts. Those are new. The sign regulations regulates, as you'd expect, the type and design and number of signs, where they can be placed, how big can they be, and things like electronic message signs, things that are up temporarily or portable. So this is done with the idea that we want to make sure that people have the right to express themselves, to market their business, to transmit messages to the public, while we also still make sure we're maintaining public safety, the character of the community is preserved. And so This section provides a set of regulations for signs that are permitted by district in various types, ones that are attached to the structure, ones that are not, they might be on a pole, for example, or on a ground mounted sign. And then other miscellaneous ones like the electronic message board and temporary signs. And so there's several series of tables in this section that help work through what type of sign would be allowed in what type of district. Let's spend a lot of time looking at on-street parking, storage, and loading requirements. We looked at a way to try to not require excessive parking, trying to keep it standardized where we could. And so you see here some of the places where we came up with uses that have a similar gross floor area. They have a certain number of seats. The number of dwelling units or guest rooms or beds are things that trigger the parking so that they're more similar, and we can have fairly consistent parking ratios because uses change. Businesses move in and out, and that gives us some more flexibility. We also introduce things for the design and lighting, trying to make sure the lighting stays on the parking lot, not on the neighboring property. We have added regulations for incorporating bicycle parking, sharing parking between uses. We set a cap on maximum parking. And we also, as that diagram shows, provided some guidance for those stacking lanes for drive-through facilities. I think the biggest change for parking is probably the one for residential. We added the option for vehicles to be parked or stored in a garage or some other type of enclosed structure. This eliminates the current regulations where things are on a time-based regulation. Parking and storage is limited up to 48 hours. Well, what happens if you're gone for a 3-day weekend, a vacation, say Thanksgiving? Does that mean you're in violation? Well, we didn't think that's really what we meant. We think really what we are wanting to do is make sure if somebody's got a vehicle parked, it's parked on a paved surface, it's parked, it's not parked in the public right of way, it's not parked in somebody else's yard, and really where the vehicles are is more important than maybe how long they sit there. And we're also giving that option that things can be placed inside a building as a way to try to help accommodate people who have more than one type of vehicle. We did set up some new regulations we're recommending for RVs, for recreational vehicles, for buses and trailers, in residential districts as well as outside residential districts. And then also parking for trucks and other types of commercial vehicles. That's addressed as well in the update. Okay. Administration and enforcement is really a discussion of how does the city staff, particularly the zoning administrator, work with this ordinance and with the customer. It sets up general procedures for how applications are reviewed and what are the steps for approval. It talks about what's called site development. What are the regulations for how you're going to use the property? And how do we go through that review process? And then how do we make sure these rules are followed? What are the steps for enforcement? So we have 3 tables here. We have one that summarizes all those applications and procedures in a chart. We have a table of land uses by zoning district. So if you're thinking of a certain land use, you can see where it's allowed. And then we have a supplemental table of accessory uses. So things like garages or for businesses, maybe outdoor sales. and how are those handled? And then each of those has a way to go to the section where there's more information that you would need to know about a solar array, keeping the chickens, that sort of thing. Then we have the two chapters that deal with zoning board of adjustment and the planning and zoning commission. So these are bodies that are mentioned in the city zoning code of Iowa. And so we take a lot of direction from what that code says. The zoning board of adjustment has really three things that they work on now. They hear appeals where someone disagrees with how the ordinance is interpreted by the zoning administrator, conditional uses, which are uses that need a little special review just to make sure that when they go into an area, they're meeting the set of standards. I think this is currently called a special use permit. And then the variance is something that allows the board of adjustment to give people some relief from the bulk regulations, general requirements of the zoning ordinance based on hardship. What we found in our research was the variance is really hard to get to. And there's oftentimes projects that, well, they might not be a hardship, but it would be a good way for a property to develop. It might solve something that's going on with the property, make it improve its value, and hopefully would have no impact on the neighbors. So this is something we're calling this special exception. It's limited to residential districts. It's focused on a practical difficulty, and it's giving people a 25% reduction in, say, a setback or lot coverage or something that's difficult to meet, perhaps because of the way the lot is, the terrain of the lot. And so we see this as a way for the community to have continued residential development, improvements made with the process going before the board of adjustment. For the planning and zoning commission, their duties were pretty much laid out and they pretty much remain the same. One of the things that the commission took time to think about was how are they going to notify people about things like rezonings, greater use of electronic notice, greater use of the city website for notices of public meetings and public hearings. Those types of things are discussed in this section. Also, the planning and zoning commission is in a separate chapter of the code of Asbury, and so it pulls it in and puts it just in one. Then we added a chapter of definitions that built on the ones that were already in place. And then in certain sections, we added specific specialized definitions that were really targeted for those areas, like the keeping of animals, like signs, solar energy, wind energy, and wireless communications. We've tried to use a lot of illustrations and really boost up the number of definitions that we have, and also do a lot of reference to Iowa code, making sure definition in Iowa code is what we're using. So in summary, some of the user-friendly things that we're working on doing is having this ordinance available online, searchable online. Currently, if you go to try to find the zoning ordinance, it's not online, but Beth has a hard copy in her office. That's kind of hard for Beth, and it's kind of hard for our customers. So we're very excited about being able to move it onto the website. The idea will be hyperlinks within, so you can move back and forth within the ordinance or go to other parts of the city code. And yeah, we've put in tables, illustrations to help explain the regulations, a lot of text with no picture or no table, not as effective. So we're trying to do that too. Already mentioned those general land use categories, and then again, we spent a lot of time trying to update parking to address residential areas and add things in like bike and shared parking options. This is the new zoning map. These districts match that early slide where I listed them and talked about their intent. So on this map, the gray is agriculture. The bright green is that A2 rural residential. What color this is? I can't tell between the commercials. They look a little different. The lighter commercial, I think, is C1, which is kind of pink. And then the bright, maybe more magenta color there is the C2. The offices, is teal. Okay. R1 single family is the kind of gold color. R2 R2 two family is brown, then R3 is dark green. And we'll get some, I can see some of these things that are supposed to be residential, say commercial, those fixed legend there. So the idea is, you see there's a lot of residential, not surprising, but also some opportunity for different types of residential and continue ag zone for holding purposes to be able to make sure development doesn't occur prematurely. And then a mix of commercial and office that we think can provide for the needs of the community, but not be something that interacts in a negative way with the surrounding properties. I think we're at the end. So we can take questions now, or we can take them one-on-one. You have a chance to look at the information we have on the posters. These the slides that I went through. And then we can have you answer questions. I'm happy to take any right now.
Thank you for coming. Very nice of you to come and explain this to us. My question is concerning the 48-hour storage rule. Are you just going to eliminate that? Is that what that does? We can, like, I have an RV, so I can park my RV in my driveway all year. Is that correct?
There are certain, the storage regulations for 48 hours, I can clarify, are really intended to be for personal vehicles. And then we have a specific regulation for RVs. And so those do have the time requirement, but it's not tied to the, I don't believe it's tied to the 48 hours. It is tied to the 48 hours? Okay, that is still tied to it.
Oh,
So-
it is?
Yes.
Okay, because we've got like a trailer length RV next to us, and it's always there.
So for some vehicles like those, the regulation still applies. But our thought was for personal vehicles. It was not as efficient a way as we could regulate the larger vehicles were the ones that were more concerned, is my recollection.
We are so close to a storage lot that they could put this on, but they don't. And we don't know who to call. They're, you know.
We call City Hall, if you're in the city of Asbury, that's the first place to start.
Well, that's been done.
And any other questions or comments?
When do you anticipate all of this going into effect?
The
The timeline right now for us is for the Planning and Zoning Commission to give recommendation to the city council at their December meeting. So then that puts the first reading for city council, the first meeting in January. And then city council from that point can decide if they want to approve it one reading or do 3 readings. So probably if you do 1 reading, you know, it'll be January. If you do 3 readings, it'll be February.
Thank you.
Do you have comments? Go ahead.
Are the full versions available online? And is there still gonna be a comment period open after the meeting?
Yes, I believe the full version's online, Jared, and we will take comments before, after, and all the way, probably up to council having the first reading until it's formally passed. We'll take comments.
We want to have a chance for people to read through it. It's pretty exciting, I know.
Is that version that's online, is that, how do I want to say, annotated, so it shows the old and the new?
No, it is not.
It's not, it's just brand new.
It's brand new. We're not gonna, it's gonna be repeal the old and adopt this new one.
What we tried to do here is we tried to give you the major changes. And in some sections, they're just completely like the wireless communications. It's just completely rewritten because there's state law.
Well, in wireless communication, we probably had a paragraph on, and so now we
Yes.
have everything now that's, you know, conforming to state law. And, you know, there's a lot of that.
Did not do that.
And, you know, like parking, when we're talking parking, I mean, parking is a totally different approach. I mean, it was like if you had C1 and like for the parking, you had everything, you know, was listed and had different, you know, every specific use was listed with a parking space, where we've taken a more inclusive approach to look at the potential use and grouped it together with those certain say uses and grouped them together more like that versus, you know, listing them all separately. To give it a more, and to make more sense actually, and less cumbersome to enforce. A lot of the changes appear to make enforcement less cumbersome.
It had some sections where the same thing was given 2 sets of regulations. So this was a chance for us to identify something that's probably grown organically over time, these changes, and identify where there's some conflict. So hopefully we eliminate those, but if you see any, this ordinance, please let us know. We want to make sure we make it as clear as possible, make it easy to enforce, but also easy to explain.
Yeah, and
Easy to
probably
understand.
for city council, you know, we have this, and then there was also like, okay, in the code of ordinances, there's a planning and zoning chapter, and then the zoning code, there was a, you know, there's a, planning and zoning commission, you know, chapter. So the goal will be to eliminate the chapter. You'll get a, you know, another ordinance to accompany this that says eliminate that chapter. And we'll use the chapter that's gonna be part of the zoning ordinance. Another thing would be, like we talked about animals, we did, you know, like 3 or 4 meetings on animals, but we have a separate ordinance on animals. So there's gonna be, in conjunction with adopting this code, there's gonna be also before council ordinance for amending that animal ordinance to be in conjunction with this, so they're not conflicting.
I guess one of the questions that I get a lot of times has to do with grandfather. What is grandfather and what isn't, and that's kind of defined in the new.
Yes, the chapter is much more extensive than what you had. It's also all in one place.
Good.
The other
And
ordinance.
it's called non-conformity, so don't go for search grandfather.
We might put grandfather in because someone said they tried to find grandfather. So the ordinance chapter on nonconformity puts everything in one place. And it goes into pretty extensive detail on, can you rebuild? Can you expand? based on what it is, if it's a residential or non-residential. It's a pretty lengthy, section. The intent is that this ordinance doesn't make, we hope, doesn't make anything or very few things non-conforming. That's not the goal. There will probably be some things. And so we wanted to make sure we had a fairly robust section to try to deal with all of those, even some nuances. Parking signs, screening, trying to be as extensive as we can, because we will, those are homes, businesses that are in use, and we want them to be able to continue. We don't want anyone to feel like this has to come down. That's not what it's intended to do. It's trying to move things forward, but only when the person is ready, basically.
Thank you.
Reading through this on section 3, the supplemental zoning, is that designed for the Verbos and Airbnbs? Is that when we're looking at accessory dwellings? Is that something that would include that? Or does that also, and does it also include like a casita, a mother-in-law house?
It probably would be all of the above. We actually are very limited as communities in Iowa and what we can do with things like Airbnb or people. There was an update to the Iowa code for what's called short-term rentals, specifically in the city zoning section. And so we use that, we pull that definition out, we put it in the ordinance, and there's really not there really aren't too many options for a city, regarding those. We were able to, just bring it into the ordinance, as I said, and it's there, so we all know what the regulations are. You can't treat a short-term rental any different than a residential property. So any of the regulations for single family, two-family, multi-family apply to those short-term rentals. That's in summary what the law says now. Which is fine, we have plenty of regulations for residential uses with building codes and plumbing and electrical and zoning. We just can't regulate them with a conditional use permit. So one of that was another thing that Beth and I worked on, is trying to make sure we review not only Iowa code, but any case law, any decisions that were coming, what were other cities doing, because we don't want to adopt an ordinance that's we can't enforce because state law says, oh, we're over here now. So whenever we could, we even incorporated the exact language.
I don't think you answered this question completely. He wants to know if the BBROs and bed and breakfasts are in the code. Are they in the code? The specific requirements for that?
The short-term rental is defined in the definition section. What's interesting is there was nothing done to the laws for the state code for bed and breakfast. Regulations for them are very specific, and those are in the code. The difference is they serve food. So with the Airbnb, typically they don't. They're a rental property, and they could be an attached dwelling unit. They could be the whole dwelling unit. They could be the attached dwelling unit and the principal dwelling unit. There's not really anything in that the Iowa code will let you do differently than what you would do for a single family home or two-family. So they're not in there specifically. They're in there as a short-term rental that has to be treated like a good residential use.
So as long as it's zoned as rental, it could be used for that?
It has not, the code also talks about, it's not based on it's a rental property. Iowa code gives you very little wiggle room to do anything. If you treat a residential use, whether it's owner occupied or renter occupied, this way, the short-term rental gets treated that way. They're defined, now I believe it's up to 30 days. So if it's a long-term rental, that's different, but they define that short-term is up to 30 days. We did a lot of research on that, we can get that for you.
We have stayed in some, I've spoken with some of the neighbors of the places that we stayed at, and they said they had mixed feelings because sometimes they would get people who were coming in and causing a ruckus until late hours, other times, just as if it was a family.
Get that in a single family home with family roll homes, you know. So I think, I don't know, I didn't research much of the impetus for it, but the way the regulations come down, if it's something within a 30-day time period, you treat it like you would any other residence, whether it's rental or not. That residence is treated all the same. I think we spent 3 meetings on just that. That's not fun for us, because there's very little wiggle room. None.
Home-based business.
I know, they rewrote that law too.
They did.
Yes, they did. However, what we were able to do was to take the state law and your existing code and make them work together. So your regulations are still in there and the state regulations. So it's, that gives you really good guidance on what is it the state wants you to allow. And what is it they are willing, they say, no, don't do this. We don't want these kinds of things as home businesses. And we used your regulations to match up with the state regs. So that one actually worked out pretty well, I think. Yeah, use what they say.
Where do you see the rural land maybe being brought into the city? The growth of the city to happen.
That's actually not what the ordinance will deal with. There is a comprehensive plan for your community that identifies growth areas. And so that would be something that we could check on. Right now, what this does is if it's in the city limits, this ordinance applies. And so then when you want to look towards the future, you step back and you look at that comprehensive plan. You should have a future land use map, and that'll give you an answer to that question. I don't have that with me. That's where that discussion. The comprehensive plan is on your website. It's called the comprehensive plan. You want to look for the future land use map.
Yeah, so this is city website, city website on departments, you know, here's the comprehensive plan. You just click on that. You can, you know, read through the, you know, the plan, what it's about. The whole documents here.
So the comprehensive plan is set up sort of like the zoning ordinance. There's text to it, which are things like Beth was showing, planning principles and goals and objectives will be in there. And you can look for which ones relate to agricultural land to get more of a picture of what's the community's doing for those properties.
Looks like we're running out of building space.
Yeah, that's a common problem. Are there any other questions or comments I can address?
Good job.
And if anyone wants to look at the nitty-gritty of the ordinance, I have it on my computer, we can look at a section in detail if you need to have something specific. Otherwise, we have the general recommendations here, we're here to answer the questions. We do have comment forms, you can, take one of those forms, fill out it, leave here with us, if you would, and put in our contact information, so we can get back to you if you have a question or want more information. You also can send us, information online, and you don't have to comment. You have months to comment.
At least a few weeks.
Or at least a few weeks, okay. Sounds like a couple months, but, the sooner we get your comments, the easier it is for us to work with the zoning commission to get something put together for the city council to consider that meets up with us as best we can. Thank you for coming and thanks for your questions. Appreciate it. We'll be here to answer any questions.
I see. Right now, more than that.